It is the year 2005. The heroic Autobots have been driven into a corner due to the thoughtless actions of a pair of double-dealing comic, inverted commas, creators. Yes, it's so bad I have to say the inverted commas out loud. With the fall of Dreamwave to fraud, thievery and ruin, our robotic space saviors were set adrift with no Western media to support them, and only the threat of increasingly poor animes on the horizon to sustain them. Then, an unknown entity named IDW Publishing appeared. After several years of quiet existence, they decided to make a play for the heroic Autobots and evil Decepticons, with the cry of, "What if we tried to produce a comic book series with any kind of relevance to the modern day that doesn't rely entirely on nostalgia and inverted commas edge?" Again, it needed to be said aloud. Luring Transformers scribe Simon Furman in with promises of actually paying him for his work, IDW set about laying the foundation for the most mature and creative incarnation of the franchise to date. This is the year 2005. And this is the Asian era.
Welcome to Moonbase 2.
Okay, guys, welcome to the Moonbase 2 IDW Retrospective Episode 1, the show that was totally not ripping off transmissions. We came up with it independently. I can prove it with Twitter messages. Almost certainly. Yes, for anyone who doesn't know, IDW is coming to its end. Some would say timely, some would say untimely. So I thought it would be interesting if we went over the different eras of IDW, because unlike most of the Transformers comics, there's very sharp divides between the different writers and creative teams. But, obviously, just me or Andy talking about that would be incredibly boring, because you listen to us do that every month anyway. So I thought I would get in a varying team of people every episode to have a chat about this. This will go up a week early for our Patreon subscribers, and then it'll go public afterwards. I didn't feel like keeping this behind a paywall. So, joining me for episode 1, we have from Transmissions, a man, a myth, a doctor, a guy who really needs to open all his toys. Especially the ones he's giving away as prizes, because, you might as well. You're never going to get an opportunity anyway. We have Charles, Big C. Hello, Charles.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Very glad to have you. It's been a while.
It has been a while, and just want to tell everyone to check out the Transmissions IDW Retrospective. But
Yes.
that's actually only for our Patreon subscribers, so it's locked behind a paywall until we get 100 subscribers. Then everyone will get a chance to listen to it. So
It's sort of what's that movie with Samuel L. Jackson where he's the negotiator? Is that it? So to think of you as a Patreon subscriber as the people who are negotiating for hostage exchange. Everyone gets you closer to freeing all the hostages, and we want the hostages free. They're interesting, likable hostages. But joining us for the first time on any Moonbase 2 material, we have from the Hasbro Universe Podcast with the word action in the front of it. I can never remember which one, because I just remember Hasbro Universe Podcast because it's HUP. So joining us from HUP, we have Callum, a.k.a. Jalaguy, a.k.a. TF Wiki Mod aplenty.
Yeah, no, I kind of got my fingers in several pies, yeah.
Any American
But yeah,
ones?
no, thanks for having me on. And yeah, it's Action and Adventure.
There we
the
go.
full name. But yeah, we go by Hasbro Universe Podcast on everything. I suppose, yeah, technically, yeah.
Yeah. The spirit of AA lives in this one young man who I believe we were on a quiz team once together, and I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yes. We would have won that if you had been quicker running up with those answers when I was yelling at. I remember yelling the name of a knockout episode from Prime across the thing, and you didn't hear me. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So, the first episode will be focusing on the Asian era. This was the original IDW era. It was dominated by, of course, the Asian series, the 4-part miniseries by Simon Furman, with most of the art done by E.J. Su, with some work by Nick Roach. I think 1 or 2 people involved as well. But it had many accompanying bits and bobs. It had Stormbringer, a 4-part series that sort of gave you the world of Cybertron as we knew it and introduced Thunderwing. It had Spotlight, which was, I believe, 16 to 19 issues. I think, no, 16 at this stage. That focused on individual characters and ostensibly was advertised as character pieces independent of the story, but largely were really, really key parts of the story. And Megatron Origins, which was an interesting beast in that, which we'll talk about in a bit, in that it predates the IDW universe. So, first of all, Callum, I'd like to know, what was your experience with Transformers comics before you started reading the Asian series? And when did you read the Asian era when it started coming out? Did you come to it later on?
Oh no! So yeah, I think I read Last Stand of the Wreckers just by itself. I think kind of probably around the time that the kind of like Barbots era was starting, and then I think I read I think it was probably the first 5 issues of More Than Meets the Eye that had been out at the time. Did the same with Robots in Disguise, and then I went back and did an archive binge starting at the beginning. So yeah, I'd read sort of Wreckers and the first bits of literally the first handful of issues of the kind of Roberts and Barber era, and then went back to the start and read everything over the summer.
Had you any experience of like Marvel or Dreamwave before then?
No, because I don't know. I had kind of a slightly odd route into like Transformers fandom. If I'm honest, like I was only sort of tangentially aware of Transformers as a kid. I didn't really get into it until after I got dragged along to see Revenge of the Fallen with friends, I think, and
friends,
then out
inverted commas.
And those were not friends.
Out of curiosity, I think I then watched some episodes of the G1 cartoon on YouTube, and then through sort of related videos ended up watching Animated on YouTube and found that far more engaging, and Animated is what got me into Transformers. But I wasn't really going into Transformers at all until sort of like the late noughties, and IDW was kind of like the first time I'd read Transformers comics in any big way.
Yeah. Were you ever like a comic reader in general, or has this been, because I remember it was when Andy Schmidt was on the Warpath, basically, and he kept on making a point of just like, well, Transformers readers don't read comics. So it's something I'm always very aware of. Like, I'm always very curious about, are comics simply, is it because it's Transformers that you're reading it, or are you a comic reader who reads Transformers?
Most I have sort of dabbled in sort of trades here and there of other stuff, like Transformers, then more recently a bunch of the other Hasbro stuff IDW's put out have been the sort of only things I've sort of like read monthly at least. But I sort of dabble here and there in trades. Like, actually, I've got a bunch of Squirrel Girl trades I need to catch up on in a minute. Actually, thinking about it, looking at my bookshelf.
Oh dear. Charles, what about you? What's your comics background, and when did you first encounter the Asians?
Yeah, so I'm what's generally referred to as an old man. So I've been into Transformers since I was a kid. I was 8 years old in 1984, so I was right there at the beginning. And Transformers comics did get me into general Marvel comics, so I started with Transformers comics, but then got into Spider-Man and X-Men and read those pretty regularly until the very, I guess, mid-90s. The Spider-Man Clone Saga basically kicked me out of comics. I was not I did not come back to comics until the Dreamwave Transformers comics in the early 2000s. So I have always been a big fan of Transformers comics. I've always loved the stories in Transformers comics. I think they're the best storytelling of Transformers across the various media, like from the movies, TV show. I think the comics really are the place where you get a lot of interesting Transformers stories. So I've loved the original comics, the G1 comics, loved the UK comics, started collecting the Dreamwave comics. Then, after Dreamwave collapsed, I continued on to IDW. So I was there, right when they started, and collecting everything monthly, right up until now.
Myself, I came into Transformers kind of circuitous as well. It was basically, I was desperately looking for cartoons to watch as an adult because I had Fox Kids. I'm just like, I'm not growing up, but you can't make me. It's technically that kind of worked, I have to admit. But so I started I was just getting into Transformers like in my early 20s. And then I encountered a website that was hosting like Transformers music videos that people were making. And they also did comic reviews, and they did Escalation, I believe, was out at the time. And I didn't read that, but I went back and I started reading Marvel and Dreamwave and Devil's Due and everything like that. And then I started doing IDW. And I don't think I was... By the time I got to IDW, it was just before All Hail Megatron.
Oh, okay.
So I sort of just was up to date just after Devastation ended and just before All Hail started. So it was a bit of an interesting point to come in. But I always find it interesting reading Furman's stuff, just because I think I come at it a bit more critical, overly critical perhaps, view than others. So, but yeah, the Asians, the basic story is we have an infiltration group on Earth. They are a small, tight-knit group of Autobots and Decepticons. Obviously, one is infiltrating to take over the planet, and one is infiltrating to presumably stop them. 3 humans, Jimmy Pink, Hunter Onion, that's Onion, not Onion, and Verity Carlo are all drawn into the horrific events around them as the infiltration protocol starts to go awry and starts to come apart. Because Starscream has discovered a brand new ore that is making him very powerful, and he thinks he can use this to usurp Megatron. Megatron doesn't take it well, and basically decides this kind of uppity nature encourages him to stay around and sort of keep these weirdos in line, moving us into Escalation, which obviously escalates things as we get in-depth in the phase protocol, the phase 1 to 6 protocol, and we see facsimiles, we see a lot of arguments on the inside. We also are properly introduced to the Machination, a group of humans working with a mysterious benefactor who are developing Headmaster technology. They kidnap Hunter and Sunstreaker, morph them into Headmasters, but everyone else thinks they're dead. Escalation was followed by Devastation, which was a primarily Decepticon-focused story. There was some looking at Verity and whatnot, but it was really about the fact that Megatron was going off the deep end. He was completely ignoring the protocols. He was bringing in Six-Shot, who was a world killer at a very early stage. And people were kind of Astro Train, Thundercracker, Skywarp, Blitzwing. They were all kind of losing a bit of faith. But at the same time, we were getting elements from the Spotlights being brought in. Specifically, characters like Galvatron and the Reapers. One was a group of sort of almost evangelical murderers, would be a nice way of putting it. And the other was, of course, this mysterious, unknown ancient transformer representing a group called the Dead Universe, who had long-ranging plans of not necessarily world domination, but merging a zombie universe with a living one. This would all be brought to a head in Revelation, which was a truncated series. Now, this was originally meant to be a 6-part series followed by another one called Expansion, but IDW decided to cancel the expansion, reduce Revelation to 4 spotlights, and afterwards they would move into All Hail Megatron. So we're going to talk about these main 4 stories first. We'll talk about Stormbreaker later on. But Charles, in general, what's your overall opinion of Simon Furman's work in the early IDW?
So I have always been a big fan of Simon Furman from the G1 stuff, so I was looking forward to the IDW reboot. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, it did go off the rails at the end. I think just the fact that the story got truncated and and he wasn't really, he had to really compress his kind of like wrapping up things into a very tight 4-issue series. But I mean, I liked the general direction. I think Infiltration and Escalation were really a really strong, tight series. Devastation starts to get a little bit wobbly, and then Revelation kind of, it's not great. But there's still some good parts. But I mean, but that's half due to editorial decisions and everything. But overall, I mean, I thought Simon Furman did in terms of taking the Transformers from the ground up, you know, not going back to the original 1984 storyline of, you know, crashing and being asleep for 4 million years, kind of doing away with that, reimagining the Autobot-Decepticon war as kind of a galactic conflict where the Decepticons are like they're almost scavengers going from world to world and destroying things, and having the Autobots be basically fighting a losing battle where they're you know they're not really doing too well in stopping the Decepticons from destroying other civilizations. And I thought it was really nice to see the Transformers reimagined. And Simon Furman, since he had such a long history with Transformers, he was able to take and cherry pick the best ideas from Transformers and reimagine them in a coherent, cohesive story. So I really enjoyed that.
Callum, what about you?
Yeah, no, I kind of I'd agree that yeah, sort of like infiltration and kind of infiltration is kind of the high point of the Asians, and they do sort of unfortunately kind of tail off a bit. But yeah, it's really nice the way that it's sort of from the outset it did kind of he kind of gave this, like, the new universe he was setting up. It's got a sort of a unique kind of flavour to it. It's got its own sort of like language of sort of things like kind of orbital jumps and infiltration protocol and like at least at the start it is a kind of really sort of nice kind of tight kind of like kind of well paced story. Like I think I was saying a while back on Hasbro Universe Podcast that you could pretty much like directly adapt kind of infiltration into sort of a live action film, and it would be a really good kind of viable live action Transformers film. I get the impression that lots of people got grumpy about it at the time, but doing the kind of like slow introduction with kind of the humans as the point of view characters and everything, it does work very well. But another thing I realised though, kind of, because a while back for the podcast I reread just the Asians, like just themselves without any of the spotlights, and I had forgotten just how much of the kind of like just how kind of necessary the spotlights are to understand what's going on. Yeah. Like a kind of infiltration and escalation, you'd be fine. But I kind of pity anyone who was just reading the mini-series and then got to Devastation, because they would not have had a clue what was going on.
Well, let's see. You've got 6 shots in the Reaper, so you've got Galvatron, you've got Nova, you've got so many things coming in there, and just like, who are any of you people?
It's like,
it hadn't occurred to me before, but like the Dead Universe plot literally doesn't turn up at all in the core miniseries until Galvatron appears out of nowhere in Devastation.
And even then it's like maybe an issue, and he's secondary to it all.
Oh yeah, it's kind of a very odd kind of, in hindsight, it's a really odd approach to storytelling. But like, I don't know, I'm not entirely. It's hard to think like what kind of editorial and Furman kind of thought they would like, because people often talk about the Spotlights like, oh yeah, Spotlights are sort of standalone stories, but yeah, they're not at all. They were a vehicle for Furman to introduce subplots ahead of them becoming relevant in the main book. And yeah, I feel like it should have perhaps been kind of sold as that rather than these are standalones, honest.
I remember reading the marketing for the Spotlights, and it was very much about like standalone character stories. But anyway, we'll get into Spotlights more later on. But that does lead me nicely into the whole story side of thing. The story and world building in particular about Simon's work is, in my opinion, the strongest part of it. He is plot focused in a way that John Barber would sometimes be amazed at. But he, I always think the Asians are very important because they were laying this groundwork of the infiltration protocol, what state the Autobot-Decepticon war is, introducing the shades of grey element, not with the Decepticons, but very much with the Autobots. In fact, apart from Ratchet, Jazz, and Ironhide, pretty much all the main cast of infiltration are fairly unpleasant. and they get more unpleasant as you go on with the books. Optimus is very unlikable in those miniseries. Like
he kills a guy.
He does. And then he's just like, oh well, Earth, fuck it. And then he leaves, which in a way I thought was setting up All Hail Megatron, and then it absolutely wasn't. That's another podcast. So what was your sort of like? What do you think about the overall story? Like Callum, you were saying you thought the actual storytelling was a bit odd.
At least logistically speaking, and how it was delivered to the reader, but just on a kind of fundamental level as the the story that's being told. I do really like it. I enjoy that it did have all these sort of like as confusing as it would be for like someone trying to actually navigate it all, but I do really enjoy how it had a bunch of different threads that like twisted around each other and connected and then went off on the separate ways again. And I guess it is by necessity that those series are a lot more plot focused, because I mean it would be a struggle to tell a story that's really character focused and does also set up and I guess in particular a new universe that doesn't draw very much at all on previous stuff. Like if you were gonna do a sort of a Dreamwave again and set it in like basically the G1 cartoon, but not quite, you could get away with it because you know what your setting is already pretty much. But
yeah,
I guess it's understandable that there is a bigger plot focus. But yeah, actually, what you're saying about the Autobots, though, like I think it's an infiltration when the humans are going into the bunker, like Bumblebee of all people.
Yeah.
It's like, oh well, accept all losses if the humans die. It's like, oh god, Bumblebee.
I remember reading that and being like, oh, that's not normal.
Yeah.
Well, like Simon very much was pushing this sort of like this is a war. For instance, he didn't introduce 4 million years, which I think was very important to making it a bit more of a believable war in some cases. And I believe it was actually Mike Costa who actually ended up bringing that in Ironhide. So he was he pushed it very much that these were like soldiers in a war. They thought of things in a very, very military fashion. For instance, Optimus has no real relationship with anyone in this. He is a leader. He is a commander. But I'll talk about that a little bit more when I want to get into characters specifically. But for me, that was where elements of the plot sort of fell away, because the story felt like it was setting up those relationship character. Bumblebee, we need to save them, and Bumblebee goes diving down the hole to pull Verity out. In the end, he just holds the tree, and Ratchet does nothing. And Ratchet is your focal point Autobot in this as well, which is very interesting. They went with that direction. But I feel like that
calls back to the original G1 comic.
True.
When all the Autobots were basically dead and Ratchet was the last one left.
Yeah, Ratchet, why are you main character? Everyone else is dead. I couldn't save anyone. But Charles, sort of like your thoughts on the overall plot of the Asians.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it started off really strong. I think the two competing plots with the Machination and the Autobot Decepticon conflict were really good ways to bring things out. They kind of dovetailed in together or kind of played off on each other together nicely. But yeah, the whole Dead Universe thing, it's really all set up in the spotlights. It's not really brought into the Asians at all until like the end of Devastation, and that is a bit of whiplash. I mean, and then Revelation is all about that. The Decepticons aren't even in Revelation, and it's all about fighting the bad guys from the Dead Universe. And it's a bit of a just. You were setting up this really interesting story between the Autobots and Decepticons, and then you kind of just drop that to tell this other story, which, yeah, I mean, I think if Simon Furman had gotten like an ongoing series where he could weave those plot threads in, it might have come together a little better. But with the miniseries format, it's that seems like it was not the best way to end the story, I guess.
Yeah. No, it really didn't help. It was ending a story with 4 books that are supposed to be about the characters, but they're not. I always said, like, they failed both as spotlights and as a miniseries because they don't examine the characters, with the exception of maybe Cyclonus and Hardhead, and they don't really tell the story very well because they keep interrupting it to say, I'm having feelings. I need to be considering what's going on now. What is life? Do I hit myself or do I hit everyone else? Oh, look, the universe is on fire.
Yeah, I mean, just make it a 4 issues miniseries. Why do you have to make them spotlights? I don't know.
I wonder if he had 4 spotlights planned. Because I know Sideswipe, he was originally planning to do a lot more because again, world building, he was planning to do a lot more examination of what brothers means in a race, where at the time it seemed like they couldn't have reproduced in a way where there would be any like physical, biological connection between people.
Right.
But he didn't get to, so it became sort of this brothers in arms thing, and it just kind of became about Sideswipe being a dick.
But yeah, I was thinking about kind of as I was kind of rereading these, that it kind of it's really just weird that Revelation did end up as kind of spotlights when they then subsequently gave him an actual mini-series for Maximum Dinobots. It's odd.
Yeah.
Very odd, and he threw in with every idea under the sun.
with no Sideswipe in that.
I can only guess. I mean, because Maximum Dinobots wasn't until All Hell Megatron was sort of a little ways in, so I guess maybe they didn't want sort of another kind of issue 1 going on at the same time as well, near the start of All Hell Megatron, is all I can guess.
Maybe.
But yeah, it's.
But Maximum Dinobots starting with did actually cause trouble for All Hail Megatron because people were going like, none of these plots are being referenced. Like, it almost feels like they should have taken a bit longer of a break and stuck Maximum Dinobots in as the last series of the Asian era.
Or maybe editorial could have tried to coordinate the multiple writers and said, hey, maybe call back to this thing that's going on over here. I mean, I mean, I know we're not talking about All Hail Megatron, but All Hail Megatron it makes it really odd to me that All Hail Megatron doesn't reference anything about Or-13 or Super Energon at all. I mean, the whole fact that you're kind of trying to take over the Earth, maybe you're doing it because there's this really powerful energy source here? I mean...
Nah, he just wants to knock down buildings in New York. Landscaping. He's actually going to build a hotel everywhere, but he's just like, don't like that building, bang. Don't like that building, bang. You're going to build me a tower. It's going to be 4-star, not 5. These people don't deserve 5. They'll get 4.
Actually, thinking about it, let me just check it. No, you see, the dates do roughly line up because around the same time that like All Hell Megatron and Maximum Dinobots were having nothing to do with each other, despite ostensibly being set in the same universe. The exact same is true of the first kind of wave of the IDW Universe G.I. Joe comics. Because it was Denton J. Tipton, I think, on Transformers at the time, but I think it was Andy Schmidt was doing G.I. Joe at that point.
Oh, Schmitty.
And the main G.I. Joe ongoing, and then like the Cobra series that Mike Costa was doing at the time, like they'd have. If you hadn't been told otherwise, you'd assume they were set in different universes because
they were at the time. I mean, they weren't folded into the same universe until 2016. They were always.
Oh well, no, sorry. I mean,
separate.
The 3 separate G.I. Joe books barely relate to each other.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
still have to read IDW G.I. Joe.
It's a mixed bag.
I've read the newer stuff, but I've never read like everyone says read the older stuff, and Costa's work in it was amazing, and it's like
yeah, the Costa stuff is decent. The Chuck Dixon stuff and the Fred Van Lente stuff is like fine, and the Karen Travis series is just awful. Stay away from it. It's 8 issues in which like G.I. Joe sit in a house and do nothing, and then some like terrorists that you don't care about do a few things, but still not a lot. It's so
Hang on, do we get like Snake Eyes, cleaning dishes or something in full gear? Because I would absolutely read that book.
No, they just sort of they just sit there in a safe house and sort of have conversations about the possible political implications of things happening. I forget if Snake Eyes. Actually, no, yeah, Snake Eyes isn't even in the Karen Travis series because he had Snake Eyes Agents of Cobra going on at the same time, which is a lot better actually. And although the trick there is that it's not actually about Snake Eyes, it's a mini-series that's about Snake Eyes standing near some more interesting people.
It's almost like they were using his name to sell the book, but
it is. Yeah, it is.
No. Next up, Wolverine in everything, because why not? So the story holds up, I think, reading the Asians. I think it is definitely the thing that holds up the best. And like I said, the world-building element was fascinating. And it gave something for John and James and Nick to work with in years to come. But I do want to talk characters. And for me, in general, this is where Simon Furman's writing kind of falls aside.
Yeah.
Verity and Hunter, to a lesser extent, come out of these books the best in terms of character writing, because they, on some level, read as people. Jimmy, not so much, and I would argue most of the Transformers don't. Largely because of the language Simon uses. He is verbose, shall we say.
Yeah.
I can honestly say the first time I ever had to look up a word reading a fictional story was reading Maximum Dinobots. and then someone said, I complained about it to someone and said, oh, it's a common word here. And I said, no, it's not. I live in England. It's not. No one here says that. Don't lie to my face. But so I was actually rereading today, and like Ratchet's it was issue 2 of Infiltration, where Ratchet's giving his monologue about things.
Yeah.
And it's like reading a computer program. It's like he started writing in the 80s and never learned how to write characters in the 90s. Maybe Simon was attempting to recapture that 1980s vibe for comics, but it's very, very strange to me reading it, and maybe it makes the Transformers more alien, which some people would say is good, but it just took me out of the whole experience. Even the first time I read it, I remember walking away and going, not so sure about this.
Yeah, it's...
So I mean, Charles, we'll start with Charles, because he hadn't said much yet, because he's a quiet, contemplative man, and has already talked about this on another podcast, which you can hear if you pay Patreon for transmissions.com.
Transmissionspodcast.com.
I knew what I said. I was setting them to the wrong place on purpose.
No, I guess maybe I'm a little bit more forgiving just because I have those nostalgia glasses, and I've always liked Simon Furman since the G1 comics. But what I felt like was the Transformers are written there. Yeah, there's not a lot of I guess there's not a lot to make the individual stand out. I think with maybe the exception of Ratchet. Since he's kind of the character that interacts most with the humans. I think later on, Ironhide gets a little bit of a standout just since it seems like the character that works most with the humans gets kind of the most characterization at whatever time. And I did like was that the idea that the Transformers are, to make them a little bit more realistic, that they are soldiers. They've been fighting, maybe not a millions of years long war, but at least thousands of years long. They've probably gone to lots of different planets, and they've probably been burned before, where they've made friends with the local population, and then they've lost to the Decepticons, and they've seen a lot of people die. So they probably have put some emotional blockers in to prevent them from getting too attached to the locals, because they know that in the end they might not be able to save them. I think Optimus Prime even makes that point at one point in the escalation. But yeah, I mean the Simon Furman's characters tend to be a little wooden, I guess. And definitely, I mean, I think we've been spoiled with the later series with John Barber and James Roberts, where we get a lot of distinct characterization. But these early ones are, I think Simon Furman does have his favorites. I think Hot Rod, Nightbeat, Grimlock, these guys do get a distinct personality. Sunstreaker as well. I mean, I think Sunstreaker gets the most love in the Asian series and in Maximum Dinobots that we've ever seen him get in a fictional story.
Actually, like the closest he came was Dreamwave at the end, where he's just a prick. and then Matt Mullen goes, "Oh, and he's gay." little did we know, they all were. But I think that's a very good point. Actually, I hadn't thought about Sunstreaker because for me, he got kind of wrapped up in the plot. But you do probably spend the most time with him you ever have up until then.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that one. But I think probably for me, one of the big character drops was Megatron. Because he just went nuts. He just went nuts by the end. Like halfway through Escalation, he just becomes a crazy person. And this reminds me of something that Vangelis has been saying to me for several years. Just like, it wasn't until James, John, and Nick got a hold of him that Megatron's personality solidified. Like who he was. Because every writer took him in such wildly different directions. And looking back on it now, you can really see that in Simon's work. Because the Megatron here is almost completely disconnected to the one that will show up in All Hail Megatron. And again, that one's disconnected from the one Mike Costa would write. It's a weird little case study in a way. It's even disconnected from the one we see in Megatron Origins, which we'll talk about in a bit. But Callum, your thoughts on the character. Sorry, I interrupted you earlier on.
Oh, no, it's fine. But yeah, no, it's kind of its old characterization. Like, very few characters get to have any kind of distinct character voice. Like, unless you're sort of Grimlock or one of Furman's favourite, you're basically just a plot mouthpiece a lot of the time. Like, Jazz maybe gets to like drop some G's and say like "my man" sometimes, but mostly, kind of. And then you either have no character voice, but then sometimes, especially if it's an internal monologue, you might start talking like you're kind of a thesaurus. Like my favorite one, I think it's in Stormbringer, is the vertiginous descents into my own personal purgatory persist. It's not at all naturalistic, but it is sort of vaguely appealing in a sort of stylistic way. Like, it's not anything a living thing would say in conversation, or even in their own head. But yeah, it's kind of fun in its sort of florid weirdness. But yeah, no, it's kind of. I feel like kind of you'd be if you were reading the Asians and you didn't really have much prior experience with G1 characters. I think you'd be hard-pressed to develop a favourite character, because there's not a lot that any of them do to... Well, I mean, I guess, kind of, some people, like, do cool things and, like, have exciting fights, but, yeah, you're probably not going to, like, grow to love any characters in Asians because of, kind of, their deep personalities. It is, it's very much kind of plot first, character second, and like I was saying earlier, it's kind of I get why that kind of happened, but it's a bit of a pity, I think.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think when people talk favorite character in this regard, it's usually Verity.
Oh, true, actually, no, the humans, like, and Verity in particular, yeah.
Do either of you have any opinion on the humans and how they played out in this?
Yeah, I like them. Yeah.
I thought.
Oh, sorry. It's the delay makes it.
Well, go ahead. You finish, and I'll go after you.
But no, kind of. Because I think, kind of having the humans as kind of the point of view characters at the start does kind of it really helps in that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess a lot of the time in Transformers, the humans just end up being kind of sidekicks. but kind of having them kind of be the first characters you meet, and sort of, because I guess kind of Ratchet is kind of really the only character that anyone that like actually is the only Transformer that actually like is a character and not just like a threat that's going to blow them up for like first like 2 issues even. So yeah, I kind of the humans get a lot to do, and so they get a lot of kind of, and they get kind of, well, I was going to say distinct characterization. Hunter and Verity do, and Jimmy Pink is also there. But yeah, no, the humans are definitely some of the best characters to come out the Asians, no question.
Charles?
Yeah, I enjoyed the humans. It was nice to see a new set of human characters, so not getting Spike. I think some people had problems with not getting like Spike and Sparkplug, but I thought it was nice to see a new set of characters. I thought Verity was the most fleshed out of the bunch, and Verity and Hunter I thought had a really nice dynamic. But yeah, Jimmy never kind of landed with me. He was just kind of there and didn't really get much to do. And that was another thing that was kind of disappointing, was having the humans basically be put in limbo at the end of Devastation and then just show up for a page at the end of Maximum Dinobots. So
yeah, I'd forgotten that as well. But yeah, kind of you're left with kind of, because Ratchet kind of resuscitates them and it's like, oh gee, hope they don't have brain damage, and then you don't see them again until the end of Maximum Dinobots.
Clearly Jimmy did, because he started hanging out with Spike.
It's true.
But yeah, I mean, I think Nick Roche does a lot more with Verity much later. But I'm disappointed that we didn't get more Hunter, and of course we have All Hail Megatron to thank for that. But I thought they were good characters that I could have seen doing other stuff with in later Transformers story, which Verity did get other stuff to do. But those were it was. I would have liked to see them have gotten more fleshed out in the Asians.
Sadly, I think we had a few opportunities that went down, but Hunter especially got kind of cut off at the knees, so to speak.
Yeah.
But let's move away from character a bit and talk about the art, which is kind of the one thing universally praised about this book. Primarily, it is done by E.J. Su. He takes an interesting stance with the Transformers in that they're not detailed to the point of ridiculousness, but they are definitely more detailed than you'd find in previous books. And almost every Transformer is redesigned on some level. Even if either they're given new alt modes and that leads to a different design, or they have the same alt mode but the design is a bit different. I think Bumblebee is probably the best example of that one. But for the most part, it works, in my opinion. 2 things let it down. Sometimes the kibble's a bit weird. For instance, Prowl has a toy-accurate, like, car roof for a back. With, like, the whole thing. It's not folded up at all. It's just... the first time I saw it, I was just like, what? And second, faces. Especially with the Decepticons, but quite a few of the Autobots. E.J. Su does this thing where the mouth has kind of almost a Glasgow smile effect, where it goes down the sides.
Yes.
And it's great if Megatron's roaring, but it really hurts emoting. The Autobots were never as bad for it, but they had it had problems. So any thoughts on the art, guys?
I like the art. I thought E.J. Su did a great job with the Asian series. I thought his art was a nice, more technical take on Transformers. Like, I think he really focused on designing the Transformers to really, where you could really see that they could plausibly transform, which is, that's always nice. And I think later artists would continue that trend. And yeah, I mean, the facial expressions are not amazing, but I did like what they did what EJ did with the human hollow avatars, like making them all have this kind of, grimace on their face. And the humans have to tell them, like, no, you're creeping everybody out. You gotta modify your facial expressions. And I think Jazz actually tells them, like, oh, thanks for the tip. And so I did like that little detail, and I think the way E.J. Su designed the environments and everything, I thought it really gave the book a very kind of sci-fi realistic feel to it. So yeah, I thought it was good.
Callum?
No, I kind of I'd agree. I enjoy the sort of there's kind of a precision and a sort of kind of a technical kind of look to the designs that kind of they're not kind of like complex, but they look kind of like an actual thing that would like exist in real life and isn't just like kind of smooth boxes kind of thing. And yeah, he drew good humans, which is kind of important given how big I think humans were in the Asians, because I feel like often in Transformers we as like IDW went forward, we end up getting kind of artists who draw great Transformers but not so great humans, or then artists who have primarily drawn humans and then come onto Transformers and can't quite get it right. But E.J. Su does both well, which was kind of it's a good thing, because if like half of the cast of Infiltration had kind of not looked right, that would have been kind of not great.
No, not the best thing to ever happen. Anything else, guys, you want to say in sort of summation of the Asians before we move on?
I suppose actually, think more about the art, I guess, kind of because it's Devastation. I think when there's some fill-in issues in Devastation, aren't there? I think Nick Roach does.
Yeah. Nick, that was sort of like Nick did the Ratchet versus Six Shot issue where Six Shot is the size of Godzilla.
And then there's a Robbie Musso issue, I think, as well.
Bless him.
And the colours, the consistent colours do kind of an okay job of tying it together, but like it kind of it's noticeable in kind of that one issue, kind of especially the Robbie Musso issue, like that is definitely more sort of, you can see like the Road War modes at least kind of are noticeably more sort of that kind of slightly more dreamwavy, sort of less sort of technically kind of precise art style. It kind of, when I hit that issue, it did sort of reinforce me, like, kind of how much I liked the way that E.J. Su was drawing everyone. And then actually, on the tour E.J. Su, like how beautiful is Spotlight Sideswipe?
I love the color work in that.
Because that's E.J. Su kind of drawing and coloring, isn't it? And so it's super impressive. Back when we first found out that E.J. Su was doing one of the Lost Light finale issues, I kind of hoped that they might be having him color it too, but he's not. So fair enough. But
no. Well, I know Lost Light is a bit stricter on color consistency.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And plus, E.J. Su has after the Asian era, he started doing some weird stuff with his coloring. He did. Everyone was weirdly patchwork. It was like everyone was wearing camo all the time. Super noticeable in Spotlight Prowl.
Yeah, now you say that. Yeah.
Charles, anything you want to add to the whole Asian talk?
Yeah, I think it was just I thought it was a good idea that just unfortunately didn't end up as strong as it started, which that's a bit disappointing. But I thought overall it was a good reintroduction of the Transformers and a good introduction of a new Transformers universe. So I appreciate all the world building, all the things that were set up here that were then built on by later writers and artists, and I'm glad we got it. So yeah.
Yeah, in that case, let's move on to Stormbringer, which was a sort of... I was talking about world building before. This is all world building. Stormbringer gives you the history of Cybertron and the war up until now, which is that there is no history of Cybertron. It's gone, more or less. During an energy crisis where Shockwave, Jetfire, and most importantly Thunderwing were all communicating with each other across factions, Thunderwing developed what he thought was a good energy-saving method, which was basically murder a bunch of organics and turn their skin into skin. More or less. He saw it as a way of developing an ultimate power source. Of course, this is Pretenders. What it did was make him probably the most powerful being that's been in the IDW universe. I'm trying to think who might be stronger, but maybe like the Darkness and Devoid.
Yeah.
But Thunderwing is the one guy you'd put against the Phase Sixers, and your money would be on him. He was ridiculously powerful. Both factions, as in the entire factions, turned on him. Not only did they not beat him, they drained him, is what they managed to do. They basically got to tire him out. But in the process, he wiped out the surface of the planet, and Cybertron was almost entirely uninhabitable. While everything's going on Earth, Jetfire goes down to Cybertron to investigate some things. He noticed things like, oh, well, the planet does seem to be recovering slowly, but who knows when it'll be livable again. And he unfortunately discovers that Bludgeon has decided that he's going to repeat the Pretender process, resurrect Thunderwing, and kind of have some fun. He drops him on places like Nebulos, where I think burnt to the ground is a very good way of putting it. But the Autobots and Decepticons are basically not standing for this again, and turn on Bludgeon and his team. He brings back Thunderwing from Nebulos, and it turns out that he used Ore-13, stolen from Earth in the 1980s, to resurrect Thunderwing. I'm saying Thunderwing a lot this time around. And Optimus manages to beat him by basically getting him to exploit Ore-13's major flaw, which is that if you use a lot, essentially you burn through the reserves very, very rapidly, and you pass out. So yeah, it was an interesting book. It gave the outline of what this world was based on. It had some okay character moments, and it introduced Thunderwing, who I love. I adore IDW Thunderwing because he's just a monster. He is a Godzilla level threat kind of thing. And I was always disappointed when he just disappears. And he's the only one of the Guardians that Nova Prime has that you never see again. And Simon said that, oh, well, they probably dropped him into a star. And I was just like, okay. But yeah, our art was by Don Figueroa, who was making his return after his very well-received work in Dreamwave. He'd go on to do the Beast Wars books for IDW, or at least Beast Wars The Gathering. And of course it was written by Simon. So guys, Stormbringer, in a way, one of the most important early stories in IDW Transformers, and the one everyone forgets.
Well,
what do you think?
I liked it. I think it was. I mean, it was good. This was another example of Simon Furman kind of taking the some of the more gimmicky ideas from the 80s and repurposing it. Like he'd already done that with the Headmasters and the Machination, and now he was doing that with Pretenders. I did like seeing a little bit more of the backstory of what was going on with Cybertron and why no one was living there anymore. And then bringing Nebulos in was nice for the minute it was there until it was destroyed. I did like the idea. What kind of disappoints me about Thunderwing is that I do remember Thunderwing in the G1 stories. He was more of an interesting villain, and I thought here he's just kind of he's just a monster. There's no kind of agency to him. So that's a little weird. And then the Pretender process, they don't really spell it all out, but it like you mentioned, that his plan was to take organic tissue, but they don't really ever say organic tissue. They just say living tissue. So I mean, you could think that he was actually taking and they do take the Technobots. So maybe he's talking about just recycling the tissue from other Transformers, because it seems like that's what he does in the that's what Bludgeon does in the issue to build the pretender suits for his his little group. So they never really go into the details of the pretender process, and also how it made Thunderwing so super powered. Like, did his pretender suit somehow allow him to tap directly into the Energon inside Cybertron, and that's why he drained it dry, and that's why he became so powerful and mindless. And so that always bothered me, is that you don't really get kind of a full explanation as what's going on in Stormbringer. There's implications, but it's kind of left to the reader to understand exactly what's going on.
And I would also say the pretender process in general in IDW just got really badly handled. We see it in Revelation, and it's basically just spacesuits.
Right.
A cup's a pretender, and we never find out what that means.
Yeah.
Callum.
Yeah, no, I realised that same thing rereading this through. I had it in my head as, that's the thing in IDW, made pretenders by flaying aliens and making suits out of them, like kind of a serial killer. But no, like, I think kind of they refer to like bio something or other at some point. But yeah, otherwise that's not spelled out explicitly. I don't know why exactly I had that impression. But yeah, it's interesting, Stormbringer. Like, the art is nice. Stormbringer is a heavy one for the kind of Furman weird purple prose internal monologues, and kind of I don't know. It's definitely kind of Whiplash from Infiltration. Like, it's a really different story to Infiltration, and like I wasn't sort of reading at the time, but I feel like I've read the fact that it is all robots on Cybertron, no humans around, was kind of a reaction to people grumbling about Infiltration having nasty, boring humans in it. Was the robots having fights? And then I was like, right, fine, here's your robots having fights, jeez. But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't call it kind of a weak story, but it's it's an odd little thing that kind of it's almost like kind of, in terms of its relation to everything else, it is almost like a kind of a 4-issue Spotlight. It has that same kind of side story that sort of dovetails into the main thing going on.
Yeah.
And but yeah, like kind of I feel like kind of IDW Thunderwing is one of those things that's kind of become a bit of a kind of a hallmark of IDW, and then has kind of because I think the Transformers Prime video game they did also did like big just like monster Thunderwing as a thing, didn't it? I think
it's the same design as well. Hang on.
But yeah, it's kind of it's a thing everyone remembers about IDW. The fact that Thunderwing is just a big scary monster.
It's basically just a super stylized version of the IDW design.
And it's a nice design. Kind of like I am not super keen on like Don's work on like the Costa ongoing, but sort of. I like the art in Stormbringer for the most part. It's sort of, it hews a bit more to sort of your kind of Dreamwavy thing of doing things. It doesn't have that same sort of technical kind of precision thing that the Asians did, but sort of it's nice art, and kind of I don't know. I don't feel super strongly either way about Stormbringer. It's kind of. It's a thing. It's sort of. I guess it brought the Wreckers into IDW. So in terms of effect, kind of its legacy, sort of. But yeah, Stormbringer. It's kind of. It is so kind of. It's so different to the Asians that it is sort of. It's hard to sort of like stack them up against it or something. But yeah, I kind of. It's nice. It was nice to get sort of a different set of characters in the focus.
Yeah, no. It's interesting you bring up Don, because I remember when I was catching up on this stuff, and I was asking people like, "Oh, what am I reading? What should I be reading? What have I missed?" Everyone was going like, "Read Stormbringer. Don Figueroa's back." or Figueira, or however you pronounce it. Because it was for want of a better term, your first big superstar artist in the modern era. He was the Andrew Wildman of his day, which is like Don from War Within is here. Holy crap, buy this book. And it's interesting thinking about that, because I would say, looking back in it, especially in the context of modern artists, Don's legacy has been a bit stained. Like I will also say, like, I think his work on IDW kicked the crap out of his work on Dreamwave.
No,
but for one, he could draw in his own style. But it's interesting. I like Don's work. Always felt very conservative to me. Like, it didn't feel like it was pushing boundaries. It wasn't really stylistic. It was some of the most conservative art. Like, even looking at EJ Sue's stuff, his was much more adventurous in terms of just the overall style and proportions and stuff. So it's interesting. Like, Stormbringer's a weird book. It's one you kind of have to read. I remember it was in the numbering system, and I remember it was like 7 to 10. So it was literally intended to be read. You couldn't just skip over it. But it's also one where there's very little in it that matters to any other book. It's just there if you want to know what the Cybertronian universe is like, because later series would really reinvent the entire idea of the uninhabitable Cybertron and what it meant.
Yeah.
And Thunderwing, like I said, apart from popping up out of nowhere in Revelation, and I can't imagine what people were thinking who hadn't read the Stormbringer, who were looking like, who the hell is this guy? It's very skippable, which is kind of odd, because I remember really liking it the first time I read it, and then coming back for this, it was just like, oh wow, this did not age well at all. Charles, any further Stormbringer thoughts?
Well, just to comment on the art, Don Figueroa was I think what he was known best for in Dreamwave was with War Within, where he basically redesigned all the Transformers to have their Cybertronian mode. So I think that was something that people had not seen before. Like, you got the very quick look at Wheeljack and Bumblebee from way back in the first G1 cartoon, and maybe a little bit of Jazz. But other than that, no one had really taken the approach of really designing the Autobots and Decepticons to what did they look like when they were on Cybertron, and making it look, relatively plausible, or, make them all look like vaguely sci-fi space vehicles rather than just, some variation on Earth vehicles. And I think that approach was I thought that was always interesting to me. Also, what he did with the Dinobots, and giving them all vehicle forms, and that comes up later in he showed that off first in War Within, and then later he brought that in, or I guess Nick Roche took those designs for Spotlight Shockwave, but also in the Stormbringer, he redesigned the Predacons, gave all the Predacons vehicular modes rather than animal modes. And that's always interesting to me when an artist can take kind of a figure that has one set of modes and then change it up a little bit. So that's something I've always appreciated from Don Figueroa. I think later on in IDW, when he does adopt a more, I guess, movie-ish, live action movie-ish design aesthetic, that's not something I was into, but here, this is kind of classic Don, and I liked it. So I was always a fan of his art. It feels a little bit more old school comics, and maybe a little bit anime too. So I've always liked that.
It's interesting you mentioned the just because in case I don't remember to say this when we eventually get to the Costa era. The ongoing art, there's been a rumor going around for a while that was less Don saying I'm doing a new style and more Andy Schmidt saying make it look like the movies.
That was what people thought when it came out. I mean, the IDW line was always, no, this is Don trying out a new style, but everyone looked at it and said, these look like the movies. Why are you making them look like the movies? And so, I mean, I don't know if they're willing to. I don't know if they're willing to admit that now, but that was always what people thought when they saw the art.
All I know is Schmitty's gone. he literally got sacked one day. I look forward to talking about Continuum.
Oh no!
Actually,
we had him on years ago. I kind of want to have him on again. And just like, so, anything you'd like to say? But yeah. There's not much to say about Stormbringer, so we will move on.
I was going to say, just quickly, actually, thinking about the designs in Stormbringer, a thing I do really like is all kind of what he did with all the the kind of shell-less pretenders, the kind of the thing where they're kind of a mashup of the shell and the inner robot is kind of it's an interesting kind of way to do it, and kind of ended up informing how kind of later toys would go of them. I feel like kind of because now when we've had stuff like kind of Skullgrin and Bludgeon as toys, they have very much gone for the sort of they're a transforming robot, but their robot mode looks like the shell because that's what everyone cares about. And yeah, look at what happens here. And like it's kind of Bludgeon is just like shellless Bludgeon. I guess the idea is that he's a skeleton. The shell is a skeleton, so let's adapt that into a robot who's got like his jaw missing and like no arm plating and stuff. It's really weird, and it's really funny when you see later artists trying to draw that Bludgeon design. Like like Spotlight Orion Pax, isn't it? And it's just Bludgeon just like hanging out casually, like before the war with no jaw. But yeah, it's kind of fun and kind of a creative way of doing those characters. So like that I think is probably my favorite design thing in Stormbringer is all those pretenders.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point to make, especially with Bludgeon. Like Bludgeon led to just a normalizing of pretender designs in general, because he really highlighted that like him having a robot mode is always weird to me because no one thinks of that. Because whether it's the toys or Marvel, who ever cared about inner Bludgeon? You wanted the Metal Samurai, who clearly had a rock theme. Every time you went like, meow. Actually, no, these days he beat thrash metal. But yeah, like looking at the other major miniseries of the time, we've got Megatron Origins, which is a weird book in several ways. It details the origin of Megatron, his being a miner, his first kill, his joining a brief revolution and then making a run for it with Rumble and Frenzy to join the gladiatorial combat, how that led to him developing the Decepticons, meeting Soundwave, meeting Starscream, beating Sentinel Prime, turning him into a literal chair, Ratbat's involvement in the early Decepticon days, etc., etc. But apart from anything else, what's really unusual about it is that it was written for Dreamwave as a 6-issue miniseries by Eric Holmes. So it was the only thing I think that was brought over in that regard. IDW liked it and said, "All right, cool. Let's get this draft done up, but we're going to cut it down to 4 issues." And I think that is pretty much the cause of all the major problems with this book, bar maybe 1 or 2, which is it's very much a 6-issue book that was cut down to 4 issues, but the guy didn't want to trim out a lot. So you end up with crazy art, because the art is by Alex Milne. Probably his most memorable stuff post Dreamwave, because it's the first time people saw his real style, and it is very crowded and so many panels, and it really does feel like someone had 6 issues they didn't want to cut down. But it's a very interesting book. Like reading it again, I think it's probably aged the best out of the Asian era as a miniseries anyway. I like the characterization of Megatron. I think, big difference here is that there are clear characterizations. Ratbat has a really cool role in it. Sentinel's fun, just in, you could really tell he was going to be a supervillain one day. The weaknesses, apart from the structure, I would say, is that I always said this, you never have the moment where Megatron breaks. You have him accidentally kill someone. You have him regrettably take part in a bunch of stuff, and then next issue he is murdering Psykill with no remorse. And you never see the moment where he goes from being the miner who, at the time, remember, this was before Megatron, the peaceful revolutionary. He was just a miner as far as we knew then, and suddenly he's leading a massive revolt against a corrupt system. So it's a book that always felt like steps were missing. But I've always really liked it, and I'm glad I went back to it, and I felt it held up. The art is really the only thing holding it back, and I like I said, I'm knowing the story of the book. It's so obvious to me that this is just the case of it. If it hadn't been trimmed down, this would have been visually much easier to read. Charles, what was your impression of Megatron Origins?
I would pretty much co-sign with everything you said. I mean, really, what rereading it, what really got me is those missing steps. I mean, the first book ends with just Megatron escaping, and then the second book starts with him, just killing in gladiatorial combat, and it's kind of like, where was the development from A to B, and then from B to C, where he's, he starts off just being a good fighter, and then he decides, I'll kill my gang leader, take over, and then I've got bigger ambitions for taking over the planet. So yeah, it's really they're really nice single issues that tell slices of what's going on in Megatron's rise to power, but without those missing steps, it kind of is not complete for me. It feels a little weird. So, but I do like how he the whole reaction from Sentinel Prime, and how Sentinel Prime seems to be this kind of put upon official where he doesn't have he's tasked with basically keeping the masses in line, because the Senate is basically a kleptocracy that's just screwing over the populace, and Sentinel Prime just has to basically clean up their messes, and then he's not given the resources to do it. So it was an interesting take on the kind of the beginning of the Autobots, and seeing Prowl is still in his second in command role there, and then some of the other Autobots are there. But yeah, I mean, it is Megatron's story, but we do miss a couple of things as what's going on. Like, we miss why Soundwave basically turns on Ratbat as his, Ratbat was originally his benefactor, and Soundwave just decides, no, I'm just going to throw in with Megatron. And we don't really see, where that decision comes from. And yeah, but I think it was a cool idea. I think I'd like to see, it seems like he just, like, it's a 6-issue story, and they just took out 2 issues and said, well, we'll just put these 4 issues and not try to modify the rest of the story in any way. So that does feel a little weird.
Yeah, like, you sometimes see that. I notice with I find it with Transformers writers more than other comic series, where it's so obvious that the editor either wasn't able to trim it all down or couldn't convince the writer to remove the right bits. I actually found that in a bit of the Costa era with the ongoing. It always felt to me like some of Costa's stuff, like International Incident, there was more going on there. I feels. Oh God. I have the feels, boys. I have the feels. I'm glad. Like, I remember actually, like, Andy Schmidt asked on the IDW boards how would he feel if he officially removed Megatron Origins from continuity. Did you ever hear that?
No, I didn't hear that.
No. Because I wouldn't say I was super active back then, but I was a bit active. And I remember thinking it would have been I think I posted it. I thought it was a real shame. I think everything needs to matter. But looking back on it, you could almost see why some people would wonder that, because at the time it was a problematic story. It was limiting where Megatron could go. Probably he had the idea of James coming in to do Chaos Theory at the time, and James was writing Megatron as being introduced to the concept of violence in a jail cell. Obviously, later writers would merge these two concepts together. But at the time, it was seen as the most removable story, and now I can't imagine the IDW continuity without it. But yeah. Callum, what's your thoughts on Megatron Origin?
Yeah, it's kind of... reading it kind of again now, it's hard to kind of divorce it from kind of all the extra context that has been subsequently added to it. But kind of doing that in my head, it is kind of it does kind of the seams kind of do show where it has been sort of chopped around a bit. You do have this kind of weird situation where basically kind of Megatron like gets made unemployed and then decides to sort of take over the planet, and there's not a super kind of smooth path from A to B. But yeah, and I do kind of I agree with kind of most of what's been said. Sort of like the number of panels on some pages is just like ridiculous sometimes, and it's early Alex Milne, which sort of it's not by no means bad art, but it's very over inked in places that can make it kind of hard to read, I feel. Also, just those like maybe not every issue, but just the later ones at least have those sort of random pages with fill-in colours where everything's suddenly really saturated and everyone has like eyes like headlights with giant glow effects on them. It's a bit jarring.
Oh dear. But it also introduced the first major continuity snaffles, which was things like the funeral scene where we had Alita and Orion hanging around.
Yeah.
So,
Orion and his twin white Orion, who I guess would alter Magnus.
Well, that we can make that work now. We can make that work now. Magnus armor. Magnus armor fix all problems.
It's an interesting story. I'm not super clued up on Marvel, but I feel like was this the first time that sort of the idea of kind of the Decepticons as kind of an uprising and Autobots as having been like the establishment as a thing, or were there elements of that in Marvel?
The Gladiator thing is from Marvel.
Oh yeah.
But like, there's the only time I can think of it was like the Decepticons rising up against other evil Decepticons. Like,
well, the odd like in the original G1 comics, and I think it gets more fleshed out in the UK annuals than on the US comics. But they do talk about how the originally Cybertron's population were called Autobots. Like everyone was an Autobot, and Megatron decided he didn't like the way society was going, and just he secretly convinced a bunch of robots to become Decepticons, and then like he did basically a sneak attack and started the war and started taking over. But they don't really talk about the Autobots oppressing anybody. It's just Megatron didn't like peace. He thought that Cybertron should conquer everyone, so he was going to take over and turn Cybertron into a race of warriors. So the kind of sympathetic origin of downtrodden underclass who's being oppressed, and then turning them into a revolution, that gets its start here, I think, in Megatron Origin.
And it is kind of
Go ahead, Callum.
It kind of, I feel like almost kind of the most notable thing about Megatron Origin is kind of its legacy, in that like so many stories now have like in the kind of Barbots era, kind of so many stories have been built upon this and like added so much extra context to it. It is kind of weird to think about it again in kind of isolation.
Yeah, it's that is one thing I have to say, having gone back and read this. It's so difficult to disconnect yourself from where the books are now, and it's almost jarring to realize how different they've become. Right. Like, because this was what I call the era of people using the term a good Transformers comic, or good for a Transformers comic. Because this is like, Andy Schmidt wasn't lying when he said a lot of people who read Transformers comics weren't comic book readers. They were engaged because they were engaging with a Transformers book. And I feel like that led to either people being more critical or more forgiving with these books than they would have been with any other issue. It's when I got really pedantic about saying I will review this as a comic book, not a Transformers comic. I was part of a short-lived podcast, 2010, and I remember I was addicted to saying, it's okay, ... for a Transformer comic. Like, it was like my catchphrase, and I looking back, I was clearly a dickhead. But don't rush to correct me, lads. Don't rush in there.
I'll take your word for it.
You weren't even an apple in your own eye then. You were just some loser academic sitting at home with his successful life and family. But look at me now, 500 episodes in, and I'm all alone. Oh, show me your ways. It's just, this was the era where we judged it not necessarily on whether it was good or not, but whether it hit those almost nostalgic tones, which I actually think hurt some of the reviews of Infiltration early on, because it wasn't being nostalgic at all. But yeah, so any other thoughts on Origins, guys?
No, yeah, I feel like I was kind of set my piece on it. It's sort of, it's kind of looking back on it. It feels like this sort of odd little thing, but kind of in isolation, it's a decent little miniseries with kind of with flaws, but it sort of holds up.
One thing I did like was the whole Starscream fake out betrayal. It's like you're going back to the origin, like Starscream's betraying him already. I mean, doesn't it take a little while before he starts betraying him? And then like no, it was just it was part of the plan. So
2 minutes in, hello, I'm about to stab you in the back. Here are my friends who look exactly like me. It's going to get weird when you find out why. But yeah, no, I did like that, because that did get me. I totally believe Starscream had turned, and I was just like, this is rushed. But yeah, that leads us into the final topic for this podcast. Before I go on with that, there are other books I could talk about. We could talk about New Avengers versus Transformers. We're not going to.
I have a weird affection for the Avengers crossover. I like that it's still canon, and that John Barber's kind of word of God is that the Avengers all died during All Hail Megatron.
Good, because they were the shit Avengers. They were the shit version of the Avengers. That was shit Spider-Man. That was Shitterman. I just like, oh my god, it was so bad. It was so terrible. It would only be outdone by. It would take years for that book to be outdone. As a terrible book, and one day I'll have to talk about that. No, shut up! Don't say the name. It'll appear in my room. It'll be right. It's everywhere. I'm going to have to talk about that when we're doing the ongoing stuff, and I'm not looking forward to it. Hate that book. And we could talk about Transformers Evolution, but one that was Hearts of Steel was, of course, meant to start a whole series of Elseworld stories that never got kicked off. But it was very much isolated in its own continuity until recently. And in terms of how it matters to the IDW universe, everything is really covered in the modern era, so we'll talk about it on some context then. So we are going to end on the Spotlights, which was, like I said, we're going to go up to Spotlight Wheelie is how far we're covering. Obviously we're excluding the Revelation books from this. But this was kind of, for many people, the gateway in. Each issue was theoretically standalone. At least, it covered characters like Shockwave, Ultra Magnus, Hot Rod, Cup, Galvatron, but it also touched on characters who didn't get a lot of attention, like Nightbeat, or Ramjet, or Wheelie, or Mirage, or RC. We'll talk about RC, I'm sure. But so, like, what's your opinion of the Spotlights as a whole? Because overall, I think some of them have aged pretty poorly. But mostly the ones I think that were most tied into the Asian storylines. Probably the only two exceptions I can think of are Galvatron and Optimus in that regard. I think they both hold up relatively well. In fact, I remember saying at the time, like, Optimus Prime was the first time I felt like Optimus was the character I thought he should be, because he gave a crap about people in this. And it introduced us to Nova and the Legacy of the Primes and everything else. The ones that stand up the best are the completely standalones, and those are rare. Maybe Shockwave did fairly well, but the surprises for me, because I didn't like it when I read it then, was when I read Cup today, actually. I was like, oh my god, this is so good. This is horror. This is full-on Transformers horror done very, very well. And it's so weird at the time, because I just clearly was not mature enough to get it at the time. But nowadays, I'm like all about touching on different genres in Transformers, and I always wanted good horror stories. So going back to read this, it's just like, oh, why didn't we get more of this? But before we sort of talk about the Problem Child, because I think we're going to have to talk about the Problem Child a little bit, because it kind of encapsulates a lot of issues. Callum, what's your thoughts on the Spotlights, and are there any that you particularly liked or didn't like?
Yeah, they're a very kind of mixed bag, aren't they? Definitely kind of. I know what you mean about a lot of the ones that are kind of are basically there to set up kind of subplots. They don't really distinguish themselves beyond the kind of very mechanical. Look, here's the thing you're going to need to know later. Sort of remember this, like and I don't like a really mixed bag artistically as well. Like some of them, like Nightbeat, I feel like has really quite weak art. But yeah, kind of. The colour. I'd forgotten just how bizarre Spotlight Grimlock ends up looking, because it's got like 3 different colorists colouring in completely different styles, just switching randomly between them.
My phone went off there. Oh. To be fair, the colorist did admit he was very drunk at the time.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure I think I remember reading that story. But Cup is definitely up there as one of the best, because it does stand alone, and it is sort of it's kind of I guess like you're saying, it's sort of it's Transformers doing kind of a genre. It's like Transformers doing a horror story, and it works really well. And like and I guess because that was the first thing not written by Furman. Am I right?
Yes, because at the time it was like, oh, it's going to be lots of different creative voices, and it took until Cup to get one, and of that era, 1, 2, 3, 2 were not written by Furman, and 1 was written with Furman's input. So,
but a lot of the kind of the plot focused ones do just feel like here's kind of a checklist of things you need to know. Actually, it's not kind of amazing, but I do like it's by no means an amazing issue, but I do like just kind of the joke of Spotlight Ramjet, where it is
it's the best issue. It's the best Spotlight.
That it's just Ramjet setting up this stupid plan for the entire issue, and then just Megatron turns up and tears his head off at the end.
Oh, it's the best issue. Oh, I could talk. I have talked for hours about Spotlight Ramjet. It's my first podcast experience ever with Spotlight Ramjet. You can ask anyone. It's out there somewhere in the ether. It was terrible, but it's so good.
Yeah, it is kind of
mini Constructicons, the worst domination plan of all time.
Like
it's so good, and then he just gets murdered at the end. And Robbie Musso's art is amazing.
Yeah, no, it's very nice. Spotlight Ramjet. I feel like is Spotlight Ramjet the first ever like IDW Transformers like comedy issue, because it is basically a comedy issue.
Oh yeah, like by a country mile. It's just so good. I've had to fight for that comic for so many years.
And actually, I'd forgotten. Oh, sorry, you go.
No, I guess I'll just say I have the contrarian opinion. I'm not that big a fan of Spotlight Ramjet, but
fuck you.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree. Yep, yeah. But I'd agree on Galvatron and Optimus Prime holding up well. I'd completely forgotten about Spotlight Blaster and how it just was never followed up on at all. I assume that would have been a thing in the longer version of Revelation and Expansion, that Blaster would have turned up and had a fight with Soundwave. But as it is, it's like now as a part of the kind of the continuity's history, it's just Blaster got angry with Soundwave one time and then never did anything about it ever.
and was a war propagandist.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is like one of the Blaster and Mirage are a bit of weird animals, and they're so isolated from everything else. And then Mirage makes what is Mirage apart from like Guido Guidi, and then John Barber happens, and they're just like, of course he does. But yeah, Charles, like overall, apart from the fact you clearly don't have any joy in your life, what is it with you in the spotlights? You know, why aren't you happy? Why? Is it because you don't open your toys?
I like to say, I have been opening my toys in the last year, and I do feel like I'm pretty happy. But
I have been enjoying. Side note: I have been enjoying that immensely. This like increasingly defensive. I'm opening the toys. Look, it's open. You can see it. I've got a video. It's open. Bless you, Charles. Bless you.
But yeah, I mean, I agree. The spotlights are it's a hit or miss kind of proposal. Some are really good, some are not great. My favorites are Shockwave, just because Shockwave also, that was the first time I had seen Nick Roche's art. That was really good. It was also, it hit my nostalgia button with the Shockwave Dinobots fight, calling back to the old G1 comic, and just a nice reimagining of Beast Wars technology. So all those things combine to really be a solid issue for me, and it is a self-contained issue. It does have wider effects to, like, it ties into the whole infiltration storyline, but you don't really need to have read that or have any information about that to just read that book. It's a really nice contained book. It does dig into Shockwave's character and also the Dinobots, so that I am really Shockwave is really my favorite of that first batch of spotlights. I also liked Hot Rod and Ultra Magnus, and those do have kind of far-reaching effects into later stories. I mean, in particular, Ultra Magnus with his reinvention as this lone space cop. I mean, that was a completely reimagined role for Ultra Magnus and his whole, duly appointed enforcer of the Tyrest Accord. And you do there are seeds of what Ultra Magnus would become in More Than Meets the Eye in this very first spotlight. He talks about getting into character when he goes to apprehend, Transformers criminals. You even have like a little bit of Magnus vision where he's scanning and looking at different criminals and what they're to be brought in for. So, I think James Roberts, of course, would greatly expand on that in More Than Meets the Eye, but the seeds are right here in Ultra Magnus. The later spotlights, Optimus Prime and Galvatron stand out as well. Wheelie, I think, is also a really good one.
Surprisingly so at the time. We were, it's such a clever approach to him.
Yeah.
I really like the art for that issue as well.
Klaus Scherwinski, he does both the art and colors there. And Wheelie, I think, at least I get the impression that a lot of people kind of hate Wheelie in the fandom and don't like his rhyming. I always thought Wheelie was fine. Even back in the old cartoons, the rhyming never bothered me. And I liked in this issue they actually give him a reason for rhyming. Like, his rhyming just didn't come out of nowhere. He's actually using it to communicate with an alien. So I thought that was interesting. And his kind of solo being like Robinson Crusoe, being trapped on this world and having to survive. I guess we're gonna talk about RC at some point. I mean, we have to, really, don't we? So I mean that's a whole separate issue, but yeah, I think those are the ones that stood out to me.
Yeah. I always thought Soundwave stood out in a really weird way, which is this very Marvel-esque Soundwave of he's a bit duplicitous, he's very self-serving. He's playing the long game, which is how the game benefits him. He doesn't have much of a relationship with the cassettes. They work for him, not with him, kind of thing. And it stands out to me because it conflicts so much with what happened later on. I'm not talking about the Barber. I'm talking about Shane McCarthy wrote him as a almost silent but very loyal individual. Mike Costa kind of brought in the idea that he might be the only person Megatron likes. And then you like Spotlight Megatron. I think is an interesting case because Nick's admitted that he always, because he grew up in Marvel, he sees Soundwave more in the duplicitous nature. So when writing how Megatron at the time saw Soundwave, it was always like, well, that's how I see Soundwave. So it's a weird book in that regard. Like, presumably Simon was just intending to have that be his Soundwave for the whole thing, but yeah, like one big important thing about the Spotlights, I think, was it gave a lot of people a chance to cut their teeth in art. There was a lot of variety in the art styles, a lot of people I think we really should have seen more of. Like, I'm amazed Marcelo Mattiera has not done more. Absolutely amazed. Or Robbie Musso, he disappeared off the planet after Rabjet, and I thought that was a huge shame. I think he did some Fun Pub stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Alex, of course, did RC. Yeah, it was just, and they had the night beats, but fortunately they were quite rare. Was Casey Collar on? Was it Casey or Guido on Galvatron?
Guido.
Yeah.
Because I don't think Casey came into the official stuff until after the Mosaic era.
Yeah, because he did a couple of the actual Spotlights, didn't he? And then he did Ironhide, and then he told lies, doing covers for a book that doesn't exist. But yeah, like the Spotlights are an interesting animal. They were very. I kind of think they're ones that never lived up to their potential, though.
Yeah, that's very true.
Alright. So, will we talk about the pink elephant in the room?
Yeah.
Because this is important. We've been talking about the world building side of things. This is when world building, plot, and character crashed. and world building was given priority, and the other two got kind of kicked in the nuts for half an hour. So, like Spotlight RC, and I'm going to say three adult males are about to talk about this on the internet, so, some perspective limitations on this, I admit. But,
I had Amy on my show for this discussion.
yeah, he had Amy. You know what? I don't even know Amy. Who's Amy? Never met her. Don't even know the woman. Who is he? Don't care. Amy. Traitor, more like. But so Simon has said for many years that he doesn't like the idea of female Transformers. He doesn't like the idea of gender in Transformers at all. So he may have once introduced RC in a Marvel comic, giving her background as she was literally made to shut up angry feminists.
That's true.
That is Earth Force. Apart from that, Earth Force is quite enjoyable. But that is something that happened. When given the opportunity, I read some early interviews, and he was always going on, I'll bring her in when I've got an idea for her. And how I can justify it in an alien race that doesn't have sex. And his way of justifying it was that they are a genderless species that defaults to male pronouns and are basically all men. They just are. And then, because G-Axis is literally a dick, he experimented on this individual years and years and years ago and altered her CNA, which is still stupid, but just because biology. Kryn from the world of Vangelis gets so angry about that idea of CNA, and I love it.
It's stupid even if you're not a biologist.
I know. Cybernucleic acid. What? You can't make it into realism by putting the word cyber on it.
I will give. I have to redeem Simon a little bit because he did his original acronym for CNA was that it stood for cyber nano algorithms, and only in Transformers Prime they decided it meant cybernucleic acid. So he gets maybe 25% credit for not.
He gets 25%. He still fails. You failed, Simon. There's the feminism. It's over. Reap the whirlwind. But So he introduced, like, there's a big story about Garrus 9, and we're introducing that concept, which of course would be huge in Transformers lore as it would go on. But RC is an experiment to introduce gender, and it drove her insane. And in effect, what many people took away from this was that, one, these books weren't for them, because if you're female, whether you're biologically female or you identify as female or whatever, these stories are clearly not intended for you, because the only woman in the entire thing is a nut job. If you're transgender, that will leave you damaged on some level, because this character was made into an equivalent of transgender, and they're insane because of the process, and that means there's something wrong with you. That's me giving the clean version. I have heard much more sweary versions of this. Yeah, it didn't go well. Apart from the fact, like, you can have sex with you can have biological sex without physical sex in a species. Like Komodo dragons do it. They can have children without ever having sex, and they have males and females. So, I'm just, like, critical research failure there, Simon. But, this was controversial because it excluded people, and a lot of people got behind it, because a lot of people were very convinced Transformers should be hard sci-fi. And those are also people who used to say things like RC's PMSing. And that's why she's on a murder spree. I've always said the thing about this, as a high concept sci-fi moment, it's an interesting idea. Like this is the world building aspect of, this is a genderless society, and here's one gendered individual. What did that do to them? Do they feel isolated? Do they feel whatever? And then they're gendered not because of nature or personality or self-identification, but they're gendered because someone else forced it upon them. So, like, as a concept for a sci-fi world, you can see the bullet points, can't you?
Oh, yeah, it's kind of...
Yeah. But then you apply it.
Yeah, it's all in the context.
And you have, like, oh, we're not gendered, when clearly everyone is. Like, let's call a spade here. No one looked at Ultra Magnus and said, could you be Mrs. Ultra Magnus? Could you be asexual Ultra Magnus? I mean, what? No, everyone goes like, that's a very large, scary man. I mean, even RC, what makes RC look female, and it's like the lips and the figure and everything else, those are clearly, like, it just is. I mean, apart from the fact you can't introduce a biological concept into something that doesn't have the biology for it. You just can't. And yeah, like I said, it was very socially awkward, and people were very angry about this book for a very long time. It led to an actual conflict between creators. That was not as big as it was made out to be, but it was big enough that it got some attention. I don't know. Charles, your thoughts on the whole Spotlight RC thing, since you had Amy? Sweet, perfect Amy, whoever that is.
Yeah,
I mean, I should apologize to anyone, because I'm sure I said something in some way that was like, you don't say that way, as I was saying that. Like, I'm just an idiot. That's my whole excuse for everything. I'm not bright. Like, he's a doctor of computer engineering. I'm a doctor of dead monsters. Which one do you think is going to say more intelligent things? But Dr. Charles,
you're pretty intelligent. I think you could get a doctorate in any field.
That is a tissue of lies. I sat there watching Netflix for 4 years. But go on, Charles, go.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not. I mean, the thing is, if you're gonna say I think Transformers should be genderless, then make them genderless. Don't make them all male. I mean, that's not the same thing. I mean, and you know, it's not like this is the first time we've had robots and genders in science fiction. Like the idea of what would a robot think about gender in science fiction. There's a very famous episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where Data creates a child. And when he creates a child, since the child's a robot, the child gets to choose its gender. It gets to choose whether it'll be a male or female, what species of alien it will look like, and it chooses to be a female. And no one had a problem with it, and no one thought it was weird. I mean, I think it's weird that you're saying all robots are male. That's like, why would they all be male? they don't have dicks. I mean, I don't know why. I think I would go the opposite way. I would say if you're a robot with like you have no kind of biological drive for sex or sex is not really an issue for you, then you should want to be whatever gender you feel like, whatever day of the week. Maybe you're changing genders every day. Maybe you're male, maybe you're female, maybe you're non-binary, maybe you're whatever. Why would it matter? I mean, for a robot, it could be like I'll try on a new suit. It's like every day it could be something different. I mean, I would go the opposite way and say robots are freer than ever to do whatever they want. I mean, I don't understand the idea of saying, well, clearly, if you're a robotic species that doesn't do sexual reproduction, then clearly you're all male. That seems that seems like a leap in logic that I wouldn't make. So it seems like you're putting artificial handcuffs on your story if you do that.
Yeah. Did you see Lindsay Ellis? She was doing this series on the Transformers movies, and she did an interesting take on gender in Transformers and like why it there was this obsession with explaining it. She did a very interesting piece on it.
I haven't seen it, but I have heard good things about it, so it's on my list. I just haven't gotten around to watching it yet.
Well, it's fun just if you want to see the words "I ate the whole plate" a lot. But it was, she analyzed it interestingly, like when people only feel like gender needs an explanation when it's women. And I hadn't thought about it like that before, and I was thinking back and just like, she's absolutely right. Because no one, like, as we said, they're all pretty much male, and no one ever felt that needed to be justified. Yeah. Because male's the fault? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we at the end, we could put this at the feet of Hasbro, because back in the day, in 1984, when Bob Budiansky was coming up with all the characters, he made Ratchet female. I mean, he took Ratchet's name from Nurse Ratchet from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and said, well, this one's female. And Hasbro said, no, these are boys' toys, so there are no females in the toy line.
And then Bandai took that baton and ran with it.
Yes, but then in the cartoons they were like, well, here's the female Autobots and here's RC. So I think halfway they were like, hey, looks like girls are playing with these toys too. Maybe we shouldn't, limit this to one gender.
Then they didn't make any toys.
Yeah,
They tried, and it was awful. Have you seen pictures of that prototype?
Yeah.
It's a monster.
Yeah. I think I read that with kind of cartoons and stuff, that's something that kind of like came from like the TV networks. In that, like the TV network will demand that like whatever your show is, it has at least some female characters in it because 50% of TV viewers are women. I think, I think I've read that as a thing. Is that the reason that there were a bunch of female Transformers with no toys in the cartoon is because that came from like the TV companies, I think.
Callum, what's your thoughts on Spotlight RC?
Yeah, it's just kind of it does come from that sort of daft place, which is that and kind of wanting to explain why female Transformers exist, and it's people see I mean, it's kind of unsurprising with Transformers, where sort of like 90% of characters always have been male. But even kind of going beyond that, there is this tendency for kind of like human society to see like male as being kind of default person, and then women as being like special different person. And so then you get something with Transformers, and if people feel like they want to try and pretend that Transformers is hard sci-fi, it's like, there's going to be a reason for this. But I think kind of the way I said it once or twice is that if you don't need to explain why Transformers have got like 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and just like have people faces, then you don't need to explain why there are men and women as well. It's just ignore it. It doesn't need to be a thing. And so like you're saying, kind of, if you strip the kind of the concept down to its sort of like kind of vaguest description, you could probably write a sort of an interesting hard sci-fi short story about the concept. but trying to do it in Transformers it was never going to turn out well. It's stupid and just uncomfortable in just a ton of ways. And I suppose the good thing that's come out of it is that kind of future creators have haven't buried it and have used it as a springboard for now we have kind of like IDWRC is kind of being like actually portrayed as like a transgender woman in like a more let's say more sensitive way. It's not hard to be more sensitive than IRC, but yeah, I guess if anything good has come of it is the kind of like Barbara and Roach, I guess mostly with sort of little sort of like offhanded kind of comments, and then I guess sort of in kind of like a more obvious way in the flashback issue, not just Brian recently, but it is now just it's a thing that IDWRC is transgender, and that's just that's how it is, and we kind of have brushed under the carpet the original context and sort of ignoring it, and we don't like to think about that.
I have to admit, I do occasionally, just because, like, from the biology point of view, that's the sci-fi thing I find fascinating. Just because because I always looked at them as gendered. I always looked at them as having like a both biological sex and gender. And so I'm just like, you have a robot with a gender identity, who's then biologically altered to be identical to a biologically normal born female, but. What? Because I spent like a week trying to come up with a term for that. I did. I think I came up with genotypically female, and I was just like, what does that even mean? I think I'm making some of these words up. Like, I just like, because again, that's the kind of interesting side of it for me. Just like that is so different, especially now you've introduced more characters like Nolan Lug, who are much more like the normal, everyday human version of transgender. So, if a story ever wanted to properly, I'm putting this here, properly examine what it meant to be RC, in the context of nowadays, I think it would be interesting, but also nowadays they're like, not even touching with a fucking barge pole.
Well, kind of like, the loose retcon that has been kind of performed with offhanded dialogue is that kind of, RC kind of was transgender, and then just, like, she wasn't sort of, it's been retconned from she is an unwilling victim of Jax's experiments to she volunteered for it because she knew she was transgender, and like it turning her into a crazy person was just because like Jaxus is a rubbish mad scientist, I guess. Yeah,
he was just like, he's a dick. And and like especially like when they've introduced the idea that sex always existed on Cybertron, and now we're into a weird phase where everyone's just been born male.
Yeah.
Like, there's been a lot of work to normalize RC and characters like her. It's just, wow, did it not need to start like this?
No. Actually, that is an interesting point in that I think, Chris I'd seen suggesting this, but it's been kind of established to be a thing, but has never been explained. This new thing now of there were women on Cybertron, and then just cisgender women just stopped being born for no clear reason. But did Shockwave do it? Did Shockwave somehow do that?
Well, I don't know. What time of day is it? Because at the time, my theory was Nova fiddled with... Like, this has been my theory since the thing. Like, because Galvatron said we lost a lot. And then Jaxus's experiments with combiners and everything else was about bringing back what was erased after him and Nova won the war. So my theory was Nova did something to Vector Sigma because he is the fan who's like, well, there's no point to it. So why do we need it? Because he's a functionist. I always sort of put it in a functionist context.
That's my theory as well. I mean, I think on at least the way I feel with at least I think in the universe for IDW and Transformers in general, Transformers can change their alt modes like willy-nilly for whatever suits their purpose. So it doesn't seem like a leap to me to say that they could change their gender whenever they felt like it, or maybe they feel more comfortable in one gender and not in another gender, and and some bots might feel better being 90% male all the time, and some bots are better 90% female all the time, and some bots don't really care and switch 50-50 because it's not a big deal. I think gender for Transformers would be much less of an issue than it would be for humans. So why would they, we shouldn't put our baggage on them. I think they would think of it as a lot more fluid and less rigid than we would. And with the exception of Nova Prime and the Functionist, because the Functionist would say, well, this is how you are and you never change from that. And probably Nova Prime would say, since I'm male, all Transformers should be male. So we're going to fiddle with the sparks and make sure none of them turn up female. And that's why Cybertron is kind of the odd duck, where all the other colonies have, much wider expression.
And plus you can say, look, memory creep, no one remembers. Yep, so... any other thoughts before we sort of sum things up, guys? Because I think we're coming to a natural ending here.
Yeah. I mean, this was since I had just gone through these stories myself. This was a nice retrospective to go back to the early stuff and see. There is some good stuff there. I mean, we just discussed the problematic stuff, but there is a lot of good stuff in these old stories. A lot of setup that sustains the IDW universe later on, and I think a lot of these nuggets were then taken up by James Roberts and John Barber and really taken a lot farther in later series, but they had their kind of seeds here, and Simon Furman really set up a universe that I think sustained the IDW comics for several years.
Callum, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, no, it really did sort of, its legacy, I guess, is sort of, its biggest legacy is probably being kind of a really strong bedrock for kind of future people to build on. Like, because it started out as sort of, Simon Furman kind of like building his own sort of custom spec universe, but it was a really good universe he built that has proven sort of a really good place for other people to tell stories. So kind of, it's by no means a perfect kind of run of comics, and rereading these has made me kind of even more appreciative of the fact that the Barbots era is going to get a proper ending on its own terms, and not a weird ending that's like some spotlights, and then also a mini-series with the stuff that we couldn't fit into the spotlights. But it's kind of, I think kind of, the Furman era is sort of, it's overall strong, and I think it's quite right that it's sort of, I generally get the impression that it's looked on the most favourably of the pre-Barbot stuff. So it's kind of flawed in places, but overall sort of, it's a good set of comics, and I did enjoy rereading them.
Yeah. In that case, guys, what we're going to be doing with this is that we're going to try and get people's viewpoints on where these fall in the grand scheme of IDW. There will probably be 5 episodes of this show, one for each major era. I'm counting Lost Light and Optimus Prime as like phase 2.5. So if you had to stack this in the 5 divisions, the Asians, All Hail Megatron, ongoing phase 2, phase 2.5, would this be a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5? Callum?
Oh gosh.
I like numbers. Deal with it.
Yeah, I would probably I put it in at 2 or 3, if only and I'm an R-ing because mostly because I think the current the 2.5 I think has been some of Barber's strongest work, but I've less enjoyed some of the Lost Light stuff, so I'd struggle to say it's like better or worse than current. But yeah, it's definitely not 4 or 5. It's easily it's better than Costa ongoing and All Hail Megatron, it's weaker than definitely than kind of the original kind of Phase 2 stuff, because I think it's so plot focused that you really don't get any character work at all, whereas kind of Barbara and Roberts did, and then like Scott and Roach coming back in with Wreckers and stuff did get a good blend of plot and character. But I guess 2 or 3. I'll call it 3. I'll call it 3.
Okay, Charles.
Yeah, this is hard. So I also agree. Of course, the More Than Meets the Eye Robots in Disguise Phase 2 era is top, but I think this is neck and neck with the Phase 2.5 and Phase 2.5 stuff in the Asians era. So I'll put it 2 just because I think it does a lot of the heavy lifting to get the ball rolling. So I think it edges out the Phase 2.5 stuff just a little bit, but they're really close.
Yeah. Personally, I will put it at 3. I think like John's run of stuff in 2.5 has been stellar. And also we got stuff like ROM versus Transformers, and when I have read crossovers with Transformers and the Hasbro stuff, for the most part, with one exception, I've kind of enjoyed them. Like Rat of Karza, no one talks about that, but that's a fun book. It's a dumb book, but it's a fun book. So I think like Lost Light has not been what it was to me, but on the other hand, I did a reread recently, and actually I was probably harsher on it in some places than I should have been. Like, it's not like my problems have gone away, it's just like sometimes I was in the moment too much. So I think a 3 is a good one. It sets up so much that is just vital to this universe. The base plots, as Callum said, they're especially Infiltration, it's a decent live action movie. It just having it truncated and having that really overly strong plot focus and having the spotlights being so key to things, and then like Stormbringer being a bit forgetful and Megatron Origins a bit hampered by its nature and whatnot. I think a 3 is a pretty solid thing. I also think there is a big gap between 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Definitely.
and I can't even imagine what gap there is between 4 and 5, because I just like, how much do I hate that? Well, but that is for another show. Guys, thank you so much for coming on to do this in this inaugural show. I've really enjoyed this. Hopefully other people listening to this will as well. As always, we like to shill people here who come on. So Callum, where can people find you? What can they find you doing?
I can be found all over the place on sort of your Twitters, your Tumblrs, forums, TF Wiki, all under the username Jalaguy, Jala Guy. It's Jala's a Bionicle character. I realised that like the other month I've had this username for like I think like nearly 15 years now. That's weird to me. But yeah, and I get up to sort of a bunch. I co-host the Action and Adventure, the Hasbro Universe Podcast, where we have been discussing the entire Hasbro Universe line. So did you read Wrath of Karza without any of the previous Micronauts stuff?
No, I read Micronauts when it was coming out.
Oh, okay. No, because I don't know. I think Micronauts kind of got worse as it went on. But yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
And actually, just recently I've been helping out because I'm on staff at the Allspark forums, and just recently we came out. We've been doing the first issue we have done as a staff project, but it's now being opened up for community and like fan additions to the Hasbro Heroes sourcebook profile book that IDW did. We have been doing extra profiles for characters that didn't get them, and that's been fun. I did sort of profiles for sort of Perceptors, Wheeljacks, and then also like other Hasbro characters that didn't have them in the book, and it's sort of that has been a fun thing that I think people should check out, because we had a lot of fun doing it, and we're now opening it up for anyone to write profiles for any old character they fancy, including getting a bit like silly with it. Like we've done a profile for the Avengers in IDW continuity because they're canon. The Avengers are canon.
Some Avengers are canon, and
Yeah.
Avengers is common.
But yeah, no,
They'll
that,
get retconned into the Avengers or something.
yeah, no, that, yeah, that's me. That's me.
Oh, cool. Charles, what about yourself? As if you need any introduction.
Well, I don't think I'm that famous, but I do host a podcast called Transmissions, and you can go to our website, transmissionspodcast.com. I host it with 3 other guys who are awesome. Hi, Jeremy, Yoshi, and Daryl. You guys are great. And we talk about Transformers. We do 2 shows every week. On Wednesdays, we talk about Transformers toys and toy news. And we have a segment called Trips to the Store where we show off the stuff we got that week. And you can see all the toys that I've opened on video, live on video. You can see them there. And then every Friday, we do Transmissions Alt Mode, which is all about Transformers comics and media. And that's where we will usually do a comic review for that week. And also, we're doing the Power of the Primes episode reviews as well. So lots of Transformers stuff to talk about. When movies come out, we do review the movies as well. I'm crossing my fingers for Transformers Bumblebee because it looks like it's going to be hopefully better than the Bay movies, but we'll see. So yeah, I mean, so you can catch our podcast at our website, transmissionspodcast.com. I'm also on Twitter, CP Shelton, and Transmissions is on Twitter too. It's just at Transmissions without the A, because some Transmissions.
Hi guys, welcome to another Moonbase 2 interview with me, Mikey. Today, a good ship has rolled into view, I think that's the term, and it's a flying continuous ship. I've been
so I mean, and we
and it's piloted by Captain
Patreon
John
well,
Barbarossa. He's back, ladies and gentlemen. The good ship continuity has docked in once more. How are you, John?
I'm good. I'm great. I'm happy to be here, and busy but happy to be here.
Yes, I am very happy to interrupt your busy day and add more pressure to it.
Do a similar show.
No worries. I'm glad to talk.
Yeah, so we're going to talk some Transformers. There's big changes coming.
Hopefully I'm going to have Mikey on for our
All
Hail Megatron discussion.
But first I want to touch on sort of the comics that have been happening since the last time we talked, sort of ROM, Optimus, stuff like that.
Thanks for having us.
We only barely got to talk about ROM.
But just for reference, I know Declassified is planned at some point.
I just want to say, probably
the
best
numbers
book
are
of
right with
2017,
Patreon to go public, yeah?
Oh, wow. Oh, thank you.
I think in our reviews,
so currently we have we're just within striking distance of 80 Patreons.
It was either
right now.
9s or 10s, like
and
the
when we
whole
get to
thing
100 Patreons, then our Transmissions Declassified podcast will be unlocked for everyone. So and we do that. That's a
can you go
monthly
into
show.
the thinking behind the development of the ROM series, and
also
why you introduced a brand new character in Star Trek?
Research on those topics.
Yeah.
Fun episodes.
Let me see how that goes back a ways. I think Chris Ryle suggested it originally. He was the one-time Transformers editor and former editor-in-chief of IDW. And he, at the time, I think he was the current editor-in-chief. He and David Hedgecock switched at some point. So I'm not 100% sure I'm right in saying that. Chris Ryle suggested it, and I think he suggested the idea of me and Chris Gage writing it together. And I've known Christos Gage for years. Going way back to when he was. Just doing some of his earlier stuff at Marvel.
Help out in a few podcasts.
So we've known each other for a long time, but never actually. I don't think we ever actually worked together on anything before that.
It will get you several.
So that had come up, and then I can't remember who brought up the idea of Alex doing it. That might have been Ryle as well, because I'd talked to Alex Milne at some Transformers convention we were both at. I can't remember which one anymore. But we were talking about doing something together, because that sounded like a lot of fun. He was just, I think he was rapping More Than Meets the Eye, or maybe he was doing something else or something. So we were excited about doing something together, and obviously Josh Perez, too. Chris and I got on Christos Gage and I got on the phone and just kind of talked about, in general, some of the stuff. He was writing the regular ROM series with Chris Ryle, But I think at that point he was about to take over just writing it by himself. And then so he had kind of the ROM thing, and the whole idea was to kind of make a comic that if you were just a Transformers fan, and you didn't know anything about ROM, the comic would completely make sense because you're seeing the Transformers characters, the Cybertronians meeting this alien race and kind of dealing with them the way they would any other alien race in Transformers. And then vice versa, that if you're a ROM fan, you're coming into it, you don't need to know, Transformers. It kind of worked out. I'd written a little bit of ROM stuff in like Revolution and stuff, but I wasn't. I'm not super conversant in ROM the way Christos is. So we both kind of, plotted out the story and we're both kind of keeping an eye on like our characters, just to make sure that it's still like tracked like that everybody was acting, like everybody was going into this with the understanding that they had, and we really wanted to, play up the idea of like organics versus mechanical life forms, and how each side would kind of view the others as being an other, being something else, being something that isn't like the normal way life works, because we kind of established in the Transformers universe that there's a lot of different ways for life to come about. So there isn't like, in this universe, there isn't like one dominant form of one dominant form or one dominant scale even of life. I think we kind of grew from there. We'd originally talked about using an existing character. I think we talked about this before. At one point it had come up to use Strong Arm from the RID cartoon. As sort of the character who would become like a Space Knight type character.
No, thank you.
But it was rightly pointed out the character just by the time we'd written the outline, just had nothing to do with Strong Arm as a character. So we just decided to save Strong Arm for later and create a new character.
All hail Megatron.
And we really just kind of
a guy who
that really fell into Alex. Like he had some really good ideas. He came up with the name and the look for the character.
We'll talk again. Bye.
I think he even came up with the idea that she was a triple changer, which obviously impacted the story quite a bit. But that was another one of the things we wanted to do, or that I wanted to do, and that Christos was really game for, because he'd had some good experiences doing this kind of thing, was to write the whole story like Marvel style, to or plot first,